Welcome to another case with the legendary Nero Wolfe and his sharp-eyed partner, Archie Goodwin. This time they're diving into a mystery born not of greed, but grief, where a CEO's final toast sets off a chain of betrayals, buried truths, and one chilling reckoning. Secrets unfold with every question, and justice, as always, is more complicated than guilt. Where are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you right now? Wherever you are, get comfortable, because some mysteries bloom slowly, and some take root in silence. It was the kind of Monday that made me reconsider unemployment as a viable alternative to honest living. Nero Wolfe had retreated to the plant room with all the finality of a man entering a monastery, and I'd spent the better part of 2 hours reorganizing files that didn't need organizing and dusting furniture that didn't care. No phone calls, no drop-ins, no crises, just silence, punctuated by the faint clicking of Theodore Horstman's misting system overhead. Fritz, ever the optimist, offered me a second helping of sausage and eggs, perhaps out of pity. I declined on principle, then regretted it by noon. The bell rang at 12:17 p.m. I was at the front door before the second chime, partly out of boredom, mostly out of reflex. What stood on the stoop was not the usual frantic widow or earnest accountant. She was tall, tailored, and carried herself like a woman who had filed lawsuits for breakfast. I opened the door a little wider. "You're either very lost or very determined." Her gaze was level. "I'm Camila Luring. I need to speak to Mr. Wolfe, urgently and privately." That last word hung in the air like a loaded briefcase, and it earned her a raised eyebrow and a silent nod from me. I stepped aside. She entered like she owned the place, which was ambitious, considering Wolfe didn't technically consider it mine, despite my name being on most of the invoices. She took in the foyer with a practiced glance, removed her gloves with a crisp snap, and waited for me to lead the way. "I'll see if His Majesty is available," I said, already heading toward the office. Wolfe was at his desk, a copy of Montaigne's essays open before him. He looked up, displeased. "Archie, you know better than to allow intrusions before 2 o'clock." "She insisted," I replied, leaning a shoulder against the doorframe. "Camila Luring says it's urgent and private, carries herself like a subpoena in heels." Wolfe exhaled. "Show her in, but I am not to be trifled with, Archie. Not today." Camilla entered and took the red chair without waiting for invitation. Wolfe didn't comment. His eyes narrowed slightly. Not displeasure, but calculation. "I'm here because I can't go to the police," she began, her voice level. "And because, if what I fear is correct, someone at my company will be dead by midnight." That earned Wolfe's full attention. He closed the book gently and folded his hands. "Miss Luring," he said, "do explain." "I'm Vice President of Communications for Tech Magnate Inc., she said. "Public image, press relations, crisis containment. I'm good at my job. Too good, possibly. Harold Driscoll, our CEO, doesn't trust anyone, especially now." Wolfe said nothing, which in his world meant continue. "Tomorrow morning, Tech Magnate is set to announce a major acquisition. We're absorbing a smaller AI firm. Their software fills a blind spot in our own platform. But yesterday, Harold found out someone had leaked the details to a competitor, a leak that could cost us millions." "And you suspect someone internal?" Wolfe murmured. "Harold does. He called for an emergency meeting tonight. Just the C-suite. No assistants, no minutes, no recordings. 5 of us in the boardroom at 7 p.m. I'd dealt with enough boardrooms to know that when power sits in a room with no paper trail, someone's career gets strangled quietly. "Why not security?" I asked. "Or a lawyer?" She gave a brief smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Because Harold doesn't believe in protection. He believes in exposure. He said, 'If someone wants to betray me, let them try it face to face.'" Wolfe leaned back. "And you believe that someone will try?" Her fingers tightened around her purse. "I believe Harold already knows who it is, and I believe he's preparing to provoke them." Wolfe raised a brow. "To what end?" "To force their hand," she said, her voice suddenly low. "Maybe publicly, maybe violently. He looked at me yesterday and said, Camilla, you should be there. Some truths need an audience. Wolfe grunted, which for him was practically an aria of disapproval. Miss Luring, you understand this is not a matter of detection. It is, at present, entirely hypothetical. She leaned forward. I'm aware, but you're not the kind of man who waits for blood to be on the floor before opening his door. You assume too much, Wolfe said dryly. I watched her, trying to decide if this was all corporate melodrama or something sharper. She didn't fidget. Her voice held no tremor, but there was tension in the corners of her mouth, in the way she measured every word. There are 5 of us at the table tonight, she said. Harold, myself, Marcus Voss, the COO, Tess Morrow, the CFO, and Lyle Chen, our new CTO. They're smart, guarded, ruthless, and one of them is afraid of Harold enough to do something drastic. What role do you play in this theatre? Wolfe asked. I used to be his confidant. Now I'm a liability. There was a beat of silence. Then she stood. I've said what I came to say. If Harold dies tonight, I want someone in the room who can see past the obvious. At the door, she turned. If nothing happens, you'll never hear from me again. If something does, well, you'll already know where to begin. She left the room with the same precision she'd entered. Wolfe looked at me. Well, Archie? I'll need a tie, I said. And a fake title. He sighed and reached for his beer. I dislike corporate entanglements, he muttered. They are invariably tedious, self-important, and bloated with jargon. Fortunately, I said, you're sending me, not your orchids. I do not like being manipulated, he added. Then it's a good thing you weren't, I replied. You just chose to help a poised, persuasive woman prevent a boardroom bloodbath, all on your own. He gave me a look that could frost granite. I expect a full account. Every word, every twitch. I shall not abide narrative vagueness. You wound me, I said, heading for the coat rack. And Archie, no theatrics. No promises. As I stepped out the door, I couldn't help but think, if Camila Luring was right, I'd be walking into a room where trust had already died, and the next thing on the agenda might be someone else. Preferably not me. By 6:45 that evening, I was wearing a charcoal grey suit, 2 shades too formal for a corporate strategy meeting, and just neutral enough to pass for a legal consultant. Camilla met me outside the tech magnate tower, where the glass gleamed with the kind of confidence that only a billion-dollar valuation could afford. You look appropriately inscrutable, she said, handing me a visitor's badge. Say as little as possible. Not my strength, I replied, but I'll try for your sake. The boardroom was on the 26th floor, a long, polished table with seats already occupied, the kind of room where even water tasted like strategy. Camilla introduced me briskly as Mr. Goodwin, retained as counsel on pending external disclosure procedures, which was corporate speak for don't ask. The introductions were as clipped as the smiles. Marcus Voss, the COO, looked like he'd rather be bench-pressing litigation than attending this meeting. Tess Morrow, CFO, tapped her phone with one hand and regarded me with faint suspicion. Lyle Chen, CTO, nodded once and said nothing. Harold Driscoll, already seated at the head, raised an eyebrow but offered no protest. Let's begin, Harold said, his voice low but resolute. We have more to lose than we admit, and perhaps more to confess than we care to share. I took my seat in the corner, eyes open, mouth shut, for now. The opening moments of the meeting could have passed for a chess match where each piece refused to admit it was on the board. Harold sat perfectly still, letting silence do the prodding. The others squirmed, subtly, each in their own fashion. Marcus Voss broke first. If this is about the leak, I want it on record that I've been against this acquisition from day one. Our core infrastructure isn't ready to absorb another company. That's not a denial, Harold replied. It's a positioning statement. I don't need to deny anything, Marcus said. My record speaks for itself. Tess Morrow cleared her throat. Harold, if we're going to have a productive conversation, perhaps we should begin with facts, not insinuations? Oh, I'll get to the facts, Harold said. But first, I want to hear what the rest of you are so eager to explain before I ask. Camilla remained silent, perfectly composed. I noted the way she crossed her legs precisely like she was building a wall out of posture. Lyle Chen tapped his pen twice, then stilled it deliberately. A man used to data, not drama. Harold leaned forward. Someone leaked the terms of the acquisition. Someone endangered a deal that took 6 months to arrange. I'm not interested in damage control. I want culpability. No offense, Marcus said, but if you're accusing us, you'd better have proof. I don't need proof to know, Harold replied. I need motive, and motive's already here. The air was thick, not just with tension, but with the unmistakable feeling that no one was going to leave until Harold had satisfied some private sense of justice. I made a note to never play poker with any of them. They'd each bluff with a straight face and a loaded hand. While the conversation ricocheted between protest and posturing, my attention shifted to the man who wasn't engaging at all, Lyle Chen. He hadn't spoken since the initial greeting, but his fingers told a different story. Every few minutes, almost imperceptibly, he glanced down at the briefcase beside his chair. Not the distracted look of a man thinking about a report he left unfinished, but something sharper, like a soldier checking his weapon. Camilla noticed too. A flick of her eyes told me we weren't imagining it. Lyle caught me watching. For a second his face went still. Then he turned away, reached for his glass of water, and didn't touch the briefcase again. But the tension remained. Whatever he was guarding, it wasn't just proprietary code. Harold, who missed nothing, even when he appeared distracted, tapped the table twice. Lyle, you've been very quiet. No defense? I've said nothing because I have nothing to defend, Lyle said, voice even. My systems are clean, and I don't negotiate under threat. Harold gave a thin smile. You'd be the first in this room who doesn't. Whatever was in that briefcase, I filed it under, to be explored later, if Harold didn't blow the room apart first. At 7:56 p.m., Harold stood. It wasn't abrupt, nor was it theatrical. It was the movement of a man who had already made up his mind. I appreciate your presence, he said, though not your candor. Marcus muttered something under his breath. Tess checked her phone again, then slipped it into her blazer. Camilla sat forward slightly. Lyle exhaled once and resumed stillness. Harold reached into the side cabinet and retrieved a bottle of bourbon. I recognized the label. Expensive, single batch, the kind you keep for victory or vengeance. He poured himself a modest glass, then raised it in the air. I've made mistakes, he said, but none worse than trusting people who mistake secrecy for strategy and betrayal for brilliance. That's enough, Tess snapped. This isn't a confessional. Harold didn't look at her. No, Tess, this is the reckoning. He drank. It was one smooth sip, not a gulp. Then he set the glass down with a deliberate tap. At first, I thought the silence that followed was dramatic pause. Then Harold's hand trembled. He reached for the back of his chair. His mouth opened as if to speak again, but no words came. He staggered. Camilla stood. Harold! He collapsed, hard and fast. The glass rolled, hit the floor, and cracked. Marcus shouted something. Tess backed away. Lyle remained rooted, eyes wide. Camilla knelt beside Harold and touched his neck, then looked up at me, her composure shattered. He's not breathing. Harold Driscoll, CEO of Tech Magnate Inc., died under a modern chandelier with a bourbon finish, and I hadn't even asked my first question. Security responded within 60 seconds, faster than I liked. The building had protocols for boardroom emergencies, though I doubted cardiac arrest was the usual concern. The doors sealed electronically. 2 guards stood outside with the nervous authority of men who hadn't trained for actual death. I showed my ID. Camilla vouched for me. They let me observe, but not leave. Inside, the atmosphere pivoted from tension to panic. Not overt. These were executives, not amateurs. But something in their eyes shifted. Survival instincts flickered. Marcus paced, muttering curses. This was staged. This whole damn meeting. Sit down, Tess ordered. You're not helping. I'm not the one who brought a stranger into the room, he barked, looking at me. Nor am I said pleasantly. But I'll help sort it out. Lyle had slumped into his chair, briefcase forgotten, hands clasped in his lap. Camila remained on her feet, arms crossed tightly. The police were on their way, standard procedure. But before the official machinery began turning, I made one pass around Harold's chair. His bourbon glass was upright, still containing a few drops. No cloudiness, no smell, no visible residue, just bourbon, clean as any drink could be. Camila approached me quietly. You saw it happen. He just drank and he died. I nodded. She whispered, They're going to turn on me. They might, but if she was right, someone in that room had already done far worse. We found a narrow window between the arrival of building security and the police. Camila pulled me into a side hall lined with award plaques and photo ops. I need you to get ahead of this, she said, before they rewrite the story. I'm not your crisis team, I replied. I'm a detective, technically and unofficially. I didn't kill him, she said. But I brought you there because I knew something would happen. I thought Harold might reveal the traitor and not die in the process. And now? Now I need Wolfe. I need him to dig faster than the cops will. That I could arrange, and Wolfe wouldn't like it, which only meant it might be interesting. I told her to keep her mouth shut until tomorrow, then left her with the officers who'd just arrived, and looked overwhelmed. Not everyone knew what had just happened. But I did. And Wolfe soon would. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened in silence as I recounted the evening. I spared no detail, especially the glass, the speech, and the curious behavior of each executive. When I finished, he sipped his beer and set it down. Arrange for them to come here tomorrow? All of them. Individually, not as a committee. He stood and paced, a rare gesture for him. One does not provoke 5 ambitious professionals without knowing how they will react. Harold Driscoll played a game he intended to end. Now we must determine who changed the rules. You think it was murder? I think, Wolfe said, that bourbon does not kill, but someone who knew it wouldn't, might. He looked at me. This will not be solved with sentiment or assumption, only precision. That, in Nero Wolfe's house, was a promise. By mid-morning the next day, the front room of the brownstone began to resemble a revolving door for reluctant millionaires. Fritz brewed a special pot of coffee for the occasion, which Wolfe ignored, and I posted myself at the door like a cheerful executioner. The first to arrive was Marcus Voss, his stride clipped and jaw tight. He gave a glance around the office that suggested we'd scored low on his list of suitable venues for executive interrogation. Tess Morrow followed, poised and unreadable, the kind of calm that would look equally natural before a press conference or a tax audit. She brought a thin smile and a thicker envelope of legal disclaimers Wolfe wouldn't touch. Lyle Chen arrived last, silent as ever, briefcase in hand, and expression somewhere between anxious and anesthetized. Camila, of course, had come early. Wolfe did not rise, and he did not offer pleasantries. "Thank you for your punctuality," he said. "We may begin." He pointed to the red chair, which always felt more like a witness box than furniture. "Mr. Voss," he said without inflection, "you first." Marcus made a face as if he'd been handed a parking ticket by a valet, then sat, folding his arms. "Fine," he muttered. "Let's get this over with." Wolfe's eyes didn't waver. "Describe your relationship with Harold Driscoll." Marcus gave a tight laugh. "Define relationship. He was the CEO. I was the one who actually made things run." "That does not answer the question." "Then no, we didn't get along. He didn't trust anyone, least of all me." Wolfe nodded once. "Why?" "Because I disagreed with him. I thought the acquisition was a mistake. Too fast, too expensive. I said so in the last 3 strategy meetings, loudly. And did he accuse you of the leak? Marcus leaned forward. The day before the meeting, he called me into his office and said he had reason to believe someone was undermining him from within. He didn't name names, but the implication was clear. I walked out. Walked out? I was this close to resigning, Marcus said, pressing thumb to forefinger. If the meeting hadn't been that night, I'd have submitted the paperwork. You intended to leave the company voluntarily, Wolfe said, and yet you attended the meeting knowing full well your position was compromised. Marcus bristled. I'm not a coward. Wolfe turned his gaze to me. Archie, I consulted my notes. Marcus raised his voice twice, didn't touch his drink, kept one hand clenched under the table. Marcus scoffed. You're making me sound guilty. No, Wolfe said, you are doing that yourself. Tess entered the chair like she'd sat for depositions before and expected this one to be less tedious. Wolfe watched her with the same interest he gave mold on a rare cheese, reluctantly intrigued. Your alibi, Wolfe said. The text messages. Yes, she replied evenly. At 7:59 I was messaging my daughter. She was having a meltdown over a late chemistry assignment. She's 14. Convenient, Wolfe said, and traceable. Certainly, Tess said. I provided screenshots to my attorney this morning. Wolfe didn't glance at them. Do you often text during executive meetings? Only when my daughter is panicking. Archie cut in. Your phone buzzed 4 times during the meeting. You responded to 2. Once before Harold stood, once after. Tess didn't blink. Are you accusing me of scripting the exchange? I'm suggesting, Wolfe said, that it is not difficult to automate a timed message. Her tone sharpened. Then you're accusing my daughter. No, Wolfe said, but I find it useful to separate what is true from what is convenient. Tess leaned back. Harold didn't trust any of us. That doesn't mean one of us killed him. Harold died 30 seconds after taking a drink, Wolfe said. You were calm. Too calm. That interests me. She gave a mirthless smile. I've worked with men like Harold for 20 years. You learn to stay calm or you drown. Archie scribbled that down. Not because it was a confession, but because sometimes a defense was almost as telling. Lyle Chen sat down with the unease of a man who'd rather be behind a firewall than facing questions. Wolfe gestured toward the briefcase he'd placed beside his chair. What's in it? Company materials, Lyle replied. Confidential. I'm not authorized to disclose them. Yet you brought them to the meeting. I don't trust the building's security. Interesting, Wolfe said. You feared sabotage, but not murder. Lyle folded his hands. I didn't know there would be murder. Indeed, Wolfe said, and yet you kept checking the case. I check everything, it's a habit. Your silence during the meeting, Wolfe continued, was notable. Your glances at the briefcase, more so. I didn't kill Harold, Lyle said flatly. No, Wolfe replied, but you may know who did. Lyle's eyes didn't waver. Not unless you want to subpoena server logs. Wolfe didn't blink. I may, but I prefer answers spoken plainly. That earned no reply. Wolfe turned to me. Archie? I checked the case while he was in the foyer, I said. Locked, no signs of tampering. It stays here, Wolfe said, until I say otherwise. Lyle didn't object, which, coming from him, was almost suspicious. Camila lingered after the interviews, and I took the chance to press her on something that had been gnawing at me. Did Harold ever mention an audit? She nodded slowly. 2 days before the meeting, said he was initiating a quiet financial sweep, limited to internal systems. Who was the target? He didn't say, but he asked for access to Tess's expense reports, specifically. That made things clearer and murkier. I made a call to a friend in corporate compliance, the kind who owed me 2 favors and a scotch. 10 minutes later, I had what I needed. Harold had scheduled an internal audit of the finance department to begin the Monday after the meeting, and Tess hadn't been informed. I relayed this to Wolfe. Motivation, he said simply. Quiet, plausible, and professionally devastating. She's smart, I said, but she wouldn't kill over an audit. No, Wolfe replied, but she might if the audit revealed more than accounting discrepancies. That was the question now. What exactly had Harold found, and who had the most to lose when he found it? Marcus returned, less bristling than before. Anything else? Wolfe asked. Yeah, he said, rubbing his jaw. A week ago, Harold blamed me for a logistics delay, said it looked deliberate. Was it? Marcus exhaled. Not deliberately. I flagged a supply chain conflict and paused distribution until we cleared the compliance forms. It set us back 48 hours. And Harold considered that sabotage. He didn't say the word, but the implication was there. I think he was already hunting someone. Why tell me this now? Wolfe asked. Because I didn't kill him, but I think someone used his paranoia as cover. Wolfe nodded slowly. Noted. Marcus stood and left without another word. That one might not be the killer, I thought, but someone had definitely played him like a pawn. Later that evening, I returned to the boardroom with Camilla's quiet clearance and a maintenance badge clipped to my lapel. 15 minutes with a flashlight and a screwdriver paid off. Nestled inside an air duct above Harold's chair was a pinhole surveillance camera, aimed cleanly at the table. Back at the brownstone, I showed Wolfe the footage feed interface. Someone was watching in real time. That's not standard company issue. No, Wolfe said. It suggests prior knowledge, possibly even orchestration. I tapped the screen. The IP address isn't masked. Want me to trace it? He nodded. Do so, and quickly. I turned to go. Wolfe said quietly, someone was watching. And waiting. And I thought someone had made sure Harold's final meeting would be his last. The report from the lab arrived just after lunch, hand-delivered in a sealed envelope by a courier who looked far too cheerful for someone transporting news of death. Wolfe didn't open it immediately. He finished his beer first, then slid a letter opener through the seal with the kind of care usually reserved for surgical procedures or soufflés. After reading it, he handed it to me without comment. I scanned the paragraph. No poison in the bourbon, I said. No foreign agent. No residue. Just 70 proof disappointment. Indeed, Wolfe said. Which means the assumption that his drink killed him is unsound. It looked like the trigger, I said. He drank, then he died. A correlation, not a causation, Wolfe replied, rising. And if we chase the obvious, we miss the truth. I tucked the report into the case file. So we look elsewhere. We look earlier, Wolfe corrected, for a method that renders the act of drinking irrelevant. He paused at the door to the plant room. Death may appear sudden, Archie, but it is often patient. That sounded poetic, but I'd seen Harold drop like a marionette with its strings cut. If the bourbon didn't do it, then someone had found a better way. Dr. Albert Pete, Wolfe's preferred toxicologist, called at 2:04 p.m. and spoke with the deliberate pace of a man who considered clarity more important than speed. It was a cardiac-specific agent, he said. Very rare. Synthetic compound, lipid-soluble, stable. Poison? Not in the traditional sense, Pete replied. It doesn't cause nausea or seizures. It disrupts electrical signals in the heart. Causes a shutdown when triggered by stress or elevated adrenaline. How long after ingestion would it activate? Depends on the subject's physical state. But generally, not immediately. Half an hour, maybe more. It's not a kill switch. It's a countdown. Could it be slipped into bourbon? Number It has a bitter base, easily detectable in liquids. More likely, it was ingested in a capsule or coated food item. I thanked him and relayed the summary to Wolfe. He listened, then murmured, Then Harold was a man marked for death long before he entered that boardroom. I said, So whoever killed him didn't act at the table, they planned in advance. Precisely, Wolfe said, and they relied on our eyes to deceive us. Which meant everything we'd witnessed might have been performance, and Harold whether he knew it or not, had been the leading man in a carefully timed final act. I paid a visit to tech magnates' upper offices with a phony ID badge and a coffee in hand, pretending to be just another consultant with too many credentials and not enough manners. Harold's assistant, a sharp brunette named Leah, didn't like me, which meant I was making progress. "I just need to confirm his schedule the day of the meeting," I said. "Meals, drinks, any external deliveries." She sighed. Mr. Driscoll was particular. No outside food, no caffeine. Protein bar, around 6 p.m, bottle of water, that's it. Protein bar, she pointed at the cabinet. His private stash, same brand, same flavor, one per day. Sealed, always. And the wrapper? Trash was cleared next morning. Why? No reason, I lied. I left with a hunch. Back at the brownstone, I described the bar to Wolfe. "A convenient delivery method," he said, "unremarkable, predictable, and entirely under the victim's control." "You think someone tampered with it?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that the simplest method is often the most effective. If Harold always consumed the same item, and it was tainted in advance." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The bar no one noticed had become the most important clue in the room. That evening, Wolfe summoned me to the office with the gravity of a judge about to deliver a verdict. He knew, Wolfe said. Harold suspected someone was plotting against him. "Then why walk into it?" I asked. "Why eat the bar?" "Because he believed the greater risk was allowing the betrayal to go unseen. His control was absolute, even over his own death." I shook my head. "So he staged it?" "To a point. He may not have known the method or timing, but he sensed danger. And rather than avoid it, he centralized it. One room, one meeting, one outcome." "That's not staging," I said. "That's suicide." "No," Wolfe corrected. "It's sacrifice." He stood, pacing, always a sign something deeper had surfaced. Harold's speech, his final words, they weren't spontaneous, they were rehearsed, crafted for an audience. I remembered the cadence, the emphasis. He'd delivered it like a man signing a will in public. Wolfe turned to me. He invited his enemies, forced them to listen, then died in front of them. "Who does that?" "Someone with guilt," Wolfe said, "or someone with nothing left but truth." That changed everything. If Harold staged his end, then it wasn't just a murder, it was a message. I had one favor left with a forensic accountant in Midtown who owed me a weekend in Atlantic City and a get-out-of-jail-free card. I cashed in both by lunchtime. By 4 o'clock, he called back with a name. "Tess Morrow, offshore wire, Cayman." Week before the meeting. "How much?" 200,000, disguised as a consultancy fee, routed through a holding firm. I relayed the number to Wolfe. "It came from a shell," I said. "But the shell traces back to Camila's foundation. Her name's on the board." "Convenient," Wolfe said. "And damning," I asked. "Could it be coincidence?" "No," he said. "But it could be misdirection. What if Tess was paying Camila? Or Camila was laundering funds for Tess? Or they were both being manipulated?" He picked up a notepad. "We must know the purpose of the transfer. Its timing suggests urgency. Its concealment suggests fear. And its trail," I added, "suggests guilt." Wolfe gave me a rare look of approval. "Well reasoned, Archie." I inclined my head. I have my moments. But beneath the praise, I sensed something larger forming, like a storm gathering behind corporate glass. Whatever that money paid for, it hadn't stayed buried, and Wolfe intended to dig it up. Tracking the IP from the boardroom camera wasn't simple, but it also wasn't impossible, not with a little technical assistance from Saul Panzer and a bottle of Highland single malt I'd been saving for a dry Christmas. He got a location, a loft apartment registered to a trust account. Name on the lease, Evelyn Driscoll. I hadn't heard of her. Neither had Camila, but Wolfe had. "She is Harold's daughter," he said. "From a first marriage, estranged, removed from all legal filings 5 years ago." "No contact?" "None recorded, but she remained interested clearly." "What would she be watching for?" I asked. "To see her father fail. Wolfe replied. Or to see him fall. It painted a cruel picture, a woman cut out of legacy, staring into the past through a keyhole of surveillance. Do we bring her in? I asked. Not yet, Wolfe said. Her presence complicates the narrative, but may clarify motive. Or supply one, I said. Wolfe nodded. Precisely. So the list expanded. Not with another killer, perhaps, but with another wound, a daughter denied. And in this case, wounds had a way of festering into action. The building was in Soho, which meant either overpriced minimalism or aging brick, trying to be clever. Evelyn Driscoll chose the latter. I rang the bell, gave my name, and waited. She answered in jeans, a dark turtleneck, and eyes that made it clear she'd already guessed who I was and why I was there. No smile, no hesitation. I figured someone would come, she said. Eventually. Inside, the space was cluttered with books, old tech, and a turntable spinning jazz too smooth for coincidence. She didn't offer coffee. I didn't ask. You watched the meeting, I said. Why? I wanted to see how it would end. Why not attend in person? Her smile was thin. I wasn't invited. She confirmed it without flinching. She was Harold's daughter, first marriage, estranged, no stake in the company, no role, no seat at the table. I wasn't part of his empire, she said, but I knew what it cost. To him, to everyone else. I leaned forward. Did you know he was going to die? I suspected he wanted to. That's not the same thing. And you didn't warn anyone? She shook her head. He didn't want saving. He wanted a stage. And from her tone, I gathered she'd come to see the curtain fall. Wolfe listened to my account in silence, fingertips pressed together. Evelyn had not denied watching. She hadn't pretended affection. She hadn't lied. At least not obviously. She despised him, I said. Not with fire, but with frost. The slow kind. Describe her, Wolfe said. I did, her restraint, her tone, her distance from sentiment. She said she didn't want anything from him, not money, not forgiveness. She's lying, Wolfe said calmly. Everyone wants something. The question is whether they act upon it. She claims she didn't interfere. She may not have, but if she knew what was coming and allowed it, that makes her complicit? No, Wolfe said, but it makes her a mirror. One in which Harold may have seen himself reflected. Not as a father, but as a failure. He closed his eyes briefly. This case has no innocent figures, Archie, only those whose motives remain dormant, which left us with a daughter denied, a father destroyed, and a question that kept ticking. Who had turned Harold's final hour from performance into execution? The suspects hadn't changed, but their shadows had deepened. That evening, with his beer at hand and the office sealed to intrusion, Wolfe laid out his hypothesis like a blueprint drawn from experience, instinct, and disdain for carelessness. Harold Driscoll, he began, was not murdered in the ordinary sense. He was betrayed. No argument here, I said. He knew the acquisition had become a sieve, Wolfe continued. Information was leaking, trust eroded. He began preparing a response, not to prevent the breach, but to unmask it. By calling that meeting, yes, but more than that, he weaponized his death. I blinked. That's poetic, even for you. Not poetic, Wolfe snapped. Strategic. He suspected multiple betrayals. He couldn't expose all of them, but he could provoke them. And make himself the detonator. Precisely. The bourbon toast, the speech. It was a trap, not to catch the killer in the act, but to force all parties into a room where fear and guilt would surface. And someone jumped early. Or late, Wolfe said. Perhaps the toxin was administered days prior. Perhaps Harold knew the window was closing. He looked toward the orchids. But make no mistake, Archie, he chose the time, the place, the audience. I leaned back. So who supplied the script? That, Wolfe said, we must now uncover. The tip came from a quietly nervous compliance officer at Tech Magnet who'd reviewed the digital logs under internal pressure and was willing to speak anonymously if it meant no subpoenas and no publicity. Lyle Chen, it turned out, had been moonlighting. He was consulting for Technova, the voice on the line said. Under a pseudonym. IP traces, encrypted comms, code samples, all under the radar. How long? I asked. 3 months, maybe more. He masked it well. I passed the file to Wolfe. He perused it slowly, as if decoding character through syntax. Technova, he said, was the competitor who undercut the acquisition terms. I nodded. And they did it by getting early access to our blueprint? Which Lyle supplied? Yes. But Lyle didn't kill Harold, I added. No, Wolfe agreed. He merely emptied the vault and left the door open. It didn't exonerate him, but it narrowed the field. Theft was a motive, betrayal another. But murder required something colder. And as Wolfe put the report down, I knew he wasn't looking at Lyle for blood. He was looking at someone who'd used Lyle's theft as a smokescreen. The next clue arrived by courier, a manila envelope, hand-delivered, bearing no return address but carrying a neat series of notarized contracts and digital signatures. Camila Luring's name was prominent. So was Evelyn Driscoll's. Wolfe read every page, lips pressed into a line. She brokered a secondary licensing deal, he said. Unapproved, signed using Evelyn's identity. I scanned the forms. That's fraud. It's also desperation, Wolfe replied, and potentially criminal. Why Evelyn? Because her name was once legally linked to Harold's estate. It gave the illusion of legacy continuity. But Evelyn didn't authorize it? Obviously not. But Harold may have discovered it and confronted Camila. That would explain her urgency. Wolfe folded the papers. She wanted to protect herself. Perhaps not by murder, but perhaps by silence. She didn't kill him, I said. But she gave someone a reason. Or she obscured the one who did. We sat in silence for a beat. Then Wolfe said, "She's clever. But cleverness can be traced." And that, coming from Wolfe, was less prediction than inevitability. Camilla's fingerprints might not be on the death, but they were all over the motive. The next morning, Wolfe summoned me early by his standards, which meant just after breakfast. "I am ready," he said, "to deliver an account of motive, opportunity, and guilt. To the police? Number, to those involved. One must see the truth with one's own eyes." He instructed me to arrange a gathering in the office. Marcus, Tess, Lyle, Camila. Not Evelyn? Not yet. They must hear it in each other's presence, he said, to understand that the sum of their actions was greater than any individual crime. "So who killed Harold?" I asked. "That," Wolfe replied, "is the wrong question." He stood slowly. "They all did, in parts. Lyle betrayed his trust. Camila stole his name. Tess hid money and feared discovery. Marcus sought to abandon ship. And Evelyn watched." He tapped a folder. "But only one acted with poison. We will expose that shortly." I exhaled. "You're ready for the confrontation?" Wolfe nodded. "Justice, Archie, is not a clean line. It is a map of many roads. And in this case, they all lead to one man." "Harold?" "Yes," he said, and to the truths he dragged into the light by dying. They arrived separately as instructed, but by 11 a.m. the chairs were full. Marcus, Tess, Lyle, and Camila, each with their own version of composure and their own reason to fear what came next. Wolfe didn't rise to greet them. He rarely did. But the sight of him already seated at his desk, arms folded, eyes half-lidded, sent a clearer message than any welcome could. "You will not interrupt," he said. "You will not object. You will listen. When I am finished, you may respond, if you still choose to." That quieted the room better than a gavel. "You were all present when Harold Driscoll collapsed," Wolfe said. "You assumed he was poisoned at that table. He was not. His death was not immediate. It was delayed, prepared, and executed long before he lifted the bourbon." Lyle shifted. Tess stared ahead. Camilla's hands were folded tightly. Marcus's jaw flexed. "I now know how it was done," Wolfe continued. "And why? And most importantly, by whom? He leaned forward. Harold brought you to that table not to solve the betrayal, but to reveal it, to trap it. He sacrificed his life for clarity, and now I will return the favor. I glanced at the four of them. The discomfort was sharp enough to slice through oak, and Wolfe was just beginning. Wolfe turned to Tess. Your alibi was elegant, too elegant. You were texting your daughter when Harold died. Yes, but the texts were automated. Tess stiffened. That's absurd. No, Wolfe said sharply. That is digital scheduling, a simple feature, and your messages bore the precise timing and formatting of pre-scripted entries. I had them analyzed by a digital linguist. That proves nothing, she snapped. It proves intent, Wolfe countered. An intent to distance yourself from a precise moment, the moment of Harold's collapse. Tess glanced at the others, but no one came to her aid. You feared being implicated, Wolfe went on, because you had motive. Harold had launched an audit, a quiet one. It would have uncovered offshore transactions, payments routed through a shell, linking directly back to you. Her breath hitched, just slightly. Camila, Wolfe said without turning his head, signed documents with Evelyn Driscoll's name, but the financial trail, the funding, was yours. You needed the merger to proceed to cover the gap. Harold's death halted that scrutiny. You timed it precisely. Tess rose. I want a lawyer. By all means, Wolfe said. You will need one. I stepped toward the phone. She didn't stop me, but she didn't sit back down either. Your daughter, Wolfe added softly, will be spared any blame. You, however, will not. Tess said nothing, but her silence was louder than any confession I'd ever heard. Mr. Voss, Wolfe said, turning to Marcus, you were angry. That much was clear from the moment you entered my office. Marcus's brow creased. I had every reason to be. Indeed. You believed Harold had lost control. You were prepared to resign. But instead you stayed. I stayed to defend myself, Marcus replied, to see who else he would accuse. And perhaps, Wolfe said, to let the storm pass. I didn't kill him. No, Wolfe agreed. But you did sabotage a shipment 2 weeks ago. You altered a routing protocol to delay a delivery, not to cripple the company, but to force a bottleneck, one you believed would justify your criticisms. Marcus said nothing. That decision cost the company thousands, Wolfe said. But it did not cost Harold his life. Marcus exhaled. So I'm off the hook? No, Wolfe replied. You're on a different one. You're suggesting incompetence? I'm stating fact, Wolfe said coldly. You allowed personal resentment to override professional judgment. He folded his hands. Had Harold lived, he would have removed you quietly. Now, your exposure will be public. Marcus looked at me, then back to Wolfe. Then why keep me here? Because, Wolfe said, guilt must be seen in full, not guessed. And if Marcus had hoped to walk away untarnished, he was now disabused of that fantasy. Mr. Chen, Wolfe said, his tone cooling further, you preferred discretion, that much is obvious, but silence, in this instance, has become complicity. Lyle Chen's lips parted, then closed. I didn't poison him. Number you merely drained him, Wolfe said. Of intellectual property, of strategic leverage, of dignity. For months, you fed Technova internal schematics. I didn't. You did, Wolfe said, through a shell account routed through a masked VPN, but not well enough. I had it traced. Lyle lowered his gaze. He never confronted me. Because he wanted proof, Wolfe said, which he gathered and which you in turn feared he might reveal at the meeting. I didn't kill him. No, Wolfe said, but you helped justify the fear that made his death possible. Lyle swallowed hard. You watched him die, Wolfe continued, and said nothing. You believed your secret was safe. But Harold's death opened every drawer. Camila turned to Lyle. You betrayed us. He didn't reply. Wolfe leaned back. You will face charges, not for murder, but for treachery. He closed his eyes briefly. The difference is subtle, but important. The room felt like a confession booth with no priest and no absolution. And Wolfe hadn't yet named the killer. But the shadows had drawn closer, and the noose tighter. Wolfe turned at last to Camila, who had maintained her silence with the poise of a diplomat caught in a collapsing embassy. "You are clever," Wolfe said, "and meticulous. Two qualities that often go unnoticed until they are misused." Camilla's lips barely parted. "I have nothing to confess." "Of course not," Wolfe replied, "because your objective was not murder, it was succession." He reached into his drawer and withdrew the unsigned contract we'd found in the envelope. A transfer of provisional authority prepared in advance, naming Camila as acting CEO in the event of Harold's incapacitation. "You intended a collapse, not a corpse," Wolfe said. "You pressured the board, positioned yourself as the steady hand, but Harold remained inconveniently vertical." Her eyes narrowed. "That's not illegal." "No," Wolfe said, "but what followed was. You forged Evelyn Driscoll's name on licensing documents to secure private funding. You routed money through Tess's shell firm. You obscured ownership. You constructed a coup, corporate, not criminal, but one that left you vulnerable when Harold refused to fall." Camila stood. "I didn't kill him." "No," Wolfe said, "but you created the climate. You built the fire, knowing someone might strike the match." She didn't reply. But something in her posture changed, not defiant, resigned. Wolfe adjusted his cuffs. "You are not the murderer, Ms. Luring, but you are the architect of chaos." And for once, even Camila Luring had nothing left to spin. Wolfe's tone shifted, quieter, colder. "And now," he said, "we arrive at the fulcrum." He turned back to Tess Morrow. "You supplied Harold's health regimen. You controlled his supplements, his food, his stress. You used a rare compound, lipid-based, odorless, delayed in effect, and administered it not in bourbon, but in his daily protein bar." She remained silent, but the mask had slipped. "You dosed him carefully," Wolfe continued. "Daily, incrementally, until the compound accumulated to a fatal level. You needed only one final trigger, adrenaline." "The meeting," I said. "Yes," Wolfe replied. "Harold's final confrontation, the emotional spike. You knew it would come." Tess lowered her gaze. "You prearranged your alibi," Wolfe said. "You automated text messages, left no visible trace, and watched him die while the others scrambled to guess the method." "Why would I?" Tess asked suddenly. Her voice was sharp, too sharp. "What could I gain from that?" "Survival," Wolfe said. "Financial, reputational, and emotional. You knew the audit would expose your offshore accounts, but it was more than that." He paused. "You hated Harold for what he took from you, for what he did to someone you loved." She didn't deny it. She didn't have to. Because now we all saw it, the quiet fury, the precise planning, the personal reckoning disguised as professional fallout. And Wolfe had peeled it back, layer by layer. "My brother," Tess said. Her voice was different now, low, stripped of polish. "He was 28, head of a startup. He trusted Harold, merged with tech magnate under false promises. A year later, his division was gutted. He drank, lost everything, took his own life." No one interrupted her. "Harold sent flowers, that was it." Wolfe spoke softly. "You waited, you bided time, and when you saw the audit, you knew the end had come, one way or another." She nodded once. "He destroyed people. I just made sure someone noticed." Camila stirred, but didn't speak. Lyle looked away. Marcus said nothing. Wolfe rose, a rare event. "Grief does not excuse murder, Ms. Morrow, but it often explains it." And Tess, for all her steel, looked suddenly, finally, tired. Not defeated, just finished. Inspector Kramer arrived 20 minutes later. Tess left without protest, walking like someone who had already served her sentence long before Wolfe named it. But as the others filtered out, Evelyn Driscoll stepped forward from the back room, where she'd been watching unseen. "She thought Harold destroyed her," she said quietly. "He destroyed me first." No drama, no venom, just a statement, the kind that lingers. Wolfe didn't reply. There are truths that even he won't refute, and some that no one can. Wolfe had returned to his sanctum, the plant room, by late afternoon. The door was open, which meant I was permitted to enter, provided I kept my voice low and my opinions lower. He stood near the benches, inspecting a rare Paphiopedilum hybrid that had refused to bloom for 3 consecutive cycles. "I had wondered," he said without turning, "if this specimen would ever reveal its colours." "It waited until the end," I replied. "Seems like a theme lately." He made a soft grunt. Not amusement, not agreement, merely acknowledgement that the world outside his orchids had briefly intersected with the one within. The silence was different now, not the silence of expectation or calculation. This was postscript silence, the sort that lingered after judgment. "Do you believe she regrets it?" I asked. "Tess," he said, "she regrets being caught." I leaned against the doorframe, watching him mist the leaves with clinical precision. "And Evelyn?" "She regrets nothing. That is what concerns me more." The air in the room held the faint, rich humidity of cultivation. Controlled growth, measured beauty. An environment Wolfe could command, unlike the chaos Tess had unleashed. "Cases like this," he said finally, "are not resolved. Merely completed." The orchid's leaf unfurled slowly under the spray. Some things, Wolfe knew, only revealed themselves when they were ready. Later, in the office, he poured his beer, the same brand, the same glass, and sipped without ceremony. "She will be tried," he said. "She will be punished, but will she be understood? Likely not." "I think Kramer understood her just fine," I said. "He didn't say a word when she was cuffed." "Justice," Wolfe replied, "is rarely poetic, and revenge never is." He folded his hands and looked at nothing in particular. "What troubles me, Archie, is not that she killed a man, but that the man she killed had invited it. Not knowingly, perhaps, but with a fatal understanding." "He lit the fuse," I said. "She carried the match." "Yes," Wolfe said. "And what burned was not just a life, but a legacy." I refilled my coffee. "So what's the verdict?" "She will serve years," he said. "But her true sentence began long ago with the grief, the resentment, the quiet decision that no one ever noticed." "You think she wanted justice?" "I think she wanted to wound the past," Wolfe said, "but the past does not bleed. Only the living do." That, I knew, was as close as Wolfe came to admitting something had disturbed him. And in this case, justice had not only burned cold, it had left ashes behind. "I keep thinking about Evelyn," I said. Wolfe glanced at me. "Why?" "She didn't lie, she didn't steal, she didn't kill, and yet she watched." "Right. She watched her father fall apart and did nothing." Wolfe made no comment. He reached for a peach, examined it, then set it down. His restraint was louder than any agreement. "She wasn't guilty," I said, "but she wasn't innocent either. That kind of distance takes practice." "She had it," Wolfe said, "the practiced kind. She wasn't trying to punish him. She just wanted to see if he'd do it himself." "Or hoped that he wouldn't," Wolfe replied. That stopped me. I hadn't considered that possibility. "I don't think she smiled when he died," I said. "No," Wolfe murmured. "But she didn't cry either." I stood. "Do we file her under suspect, spectator, or survivor?" "She was all three," Wolfe said, "but mostly an echo." The word lingered in the room. Some people shout, some whisper, and some never speak at all, but leave behind a sound that outlasts them. Back in the plant room, Wolfe resumed his rounds, watering a sequence of orchids whose names I couldn't pronounce but had learned never to mislabel. "Loss," he said, "is fertile ground. From it grows guilt, cruelty, even brilliance. But not all loss becomes poison. I sat in the corner chair, one leg over the other. Tess chose poison. No, he said. Tess chose punishment. The poison was a tool. Evelyn chose silence. Yes, Wolfe said. And Camila chose ambition. Lyle chose profit. Marcus chose pride. And you? I chose orchids, he said, not smiling. It made sense in his way. He had never chased power, just precision, order, and perhaps a certain moral geometry, even if the lines never quite formed a square. You ever think you missed your calling? I asked. As a philosopher? He gave me a look I'd received only 3 times in our tenure. Archie, philosophy is for men with nothing left to build. I solve crimes. I couldn't argue with that. And honestly, it was probably the closest he'd come to introspection in a month. He resumed misting. Saints and villains are never born. They're cultivated, like orchids. The difference is in the pruning. I leaned back, letting that sink in. Wolfe didn't always make sense to the world, but to the orchids, and occasionally to me, he made perfect sense. Later that evening, after Fritz had cleared the last plate and Wolfe had returned to his Montaigne, I sat at my desk and stared at the notes from the case. So many motives, so many moves, but one question lingered, the kind that didn't fit in a report. What exactly had been Tess's greatest mistake? The murder? Or the belief that erasing Harold would rewrite the past she hated? She had executed her plan with surgical control. But she forgot something Wolfe never did. The past is a stubborn patient. So, for those curious enough to wonder, what do you think? Did she kill a tyrant, or merely carve her own name into a different kind of legacy? Let us know. Wolfe won't ask, but I will. And that, my dear reader, is how it happened. From a bourbon glass that meant nothing to a motive that meant everything, justice was served, as it usually is in Wolfe's world, with reluctance, precision, and a side of cold beer. If you enjoyed watching the walls close in and the lies fall apart, stick around. There are more cases, more suspects, and more orchids. Just don't bring any lies into the office. Wolfe can smell them before the door even shuts. And I'll be here, asking the questions he won't. As Wolfe settled back among his orchids, he murmured, "Revenge is never clean, Archie. It stains everything, especially the hand that delivers it." And perhaps that was the bitter root beneath this case, not the poison Tess used, but the years of resentment she fed until it bloomed into something fatal. But now I turn it to you. What do you think was Tess's true downfall? The murder itself, or believing it would rewrite the grief she never voiced? Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more cases with Wolfe and me, and pass this mystery on to a fellow detective at heart.